Hyperspace tracking was a key plot point of The Last Jedi. It prevented the Resistance from effectively fleeing the First Order, especially given their limited fuel. The idea of tracking ships after a lightspeed jump actually first appears in The Empire Strikes Back.
Alert all commands. Calculate every possible destination along the last known trajectory.
But does The Last Jedi's new technology make any sense? That's what we'll discuss today. Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to another Star Wars lore video. Before we begin, in case you missed it, Battle of the Dreadnoughts premiered last Friday. I've already gotten so much great feedback, but I truly appreciate every comment and every opinion that you guys have to share, as it will help determine the kind of content that I make in the future. I'm also curious, would you guys have preferred for that to be a YouTube premiere? Let me know down below. Anyway, hyperspace tracking in The Last Jedi follows the principle that a ship, when jumping into hyperspace, has a specific trajectory, indicating a likely range of destinations which can be narrowed down with a computer. This is something we've seen in Legends to a degree, either with multiple ships sharing information about a single vessel in order to determine a likely destination heading, or with an advanced ship like the Stealth X sniffing basic directional data from another ship's navigational computer. However, in Legends, even with the best case scenario, the tracking only provided a general area or range of locations where the ship might be. It didn't allow pinpoint tracking like with the First Order in The Last Jedi. Speaking of, according to Episode 8's novelization, the First Order's technology essentially brute forces the process through a combination of advanced mathematics and perhaps predictive algorithms. Here are a few specific and fairly long excerpts from the novel itself. You say you can track the Resistance fleet even after it escapes to hyperspace, something no military force in galactic history has been able to do, Snoke said, and Hux relaxed. No military force in galactic history had access to the technology we have created, Supreme Leader. The Resistance fleet will be on the other side of the galaxy by now, Snoke said, in any of a billion star systems. The prospect of checking them all makes me weary, General. We need not check them all, Supreme Leader. Our tracking system's computer network contains millennia's worth of data, every after-action report from Imperial history, as well as many from the Republic's judicial forces and planetary security forces. It contains astrogation reports, briefings from scouts and commercial guilds, separatist intel. A full inventory would be tedious, rumbled Snoke. Of course, Supreme Leader. Our sensors pinpoint the target's last known trajectory, and tracking control analyzes it against our data sets. Trillions of potential destinations are sifted and reduced to hundreds, then dozens, and finally one. So, your solution to this ancient problem is no conceptual breakthrough, Snoke said. Your invention is a product not of genius, but brute force. So, does this explanation make sense? Well, I'm not sure. Essentially, the First Order has a supercomputer which can analyze the trajectory of a ship and determine a likely position. The fact that this computer is super advanced is also touched on in the Last Jedi cross-section. But let's first look at Legends, and there are a few things we know from hyperspace which may or may not apply to the current canon. First of all, hyperspace generally occurs along specific lanes, with microjumps outside of these lanes being relatively rare. This is why major lanes like the Corellian Run exist. In Legends at least, it seems like adjustments during hyperspace didn't really happen, and that there were certain points where a ship would have to exit, reorient, and then re-enter hyperspace. Places like the deep core were hard to navigate, as the presence of black holes and other weird gravity made hyperspace travel require several jumps. The new Thrawn novel seems to imply the same thing in the unknown regions, at least without the use of force sensitives. Again, in Legends at least, once one departed on a hyperlane, there were various exit points. Obviously, you could drop out of space in the middle of nowhere, not preferable, or you could leave on one of the various planets which sat along the same line. There may be a hard exit point where the lane ended, but there should be almost an infinite amount of exit points before then. For example, if you're on the Corellian Run and departing from Ryloth, you could stop at Druckenwell, Ramamul, or basically anywhere between the south of Ryloth and Corellia before having to re-enter space and head to the galactic north or south. What's my point in this? Well, I understand how a computer could take a ship's movement and determine directional vectors, but at least in the way it's described in the novelization, I'm not exactly sure how it could determine where the ship would actually exit. For example, in Legacy of the Force Tempest, Jaina is able to tell that the Millennium Falcon is headed towards the Hapes Consortium, but not the specific planet that it will be stopping at. And she's only able to get so specific about Hapes because of the transitory mists, which sort of limit travel. And there's nothing that says that the Falcon couldn't stop somewhere earlier. Hapes was just the most likely location. Now, there's actually an explanation for this baked into the hyperspace tracking system, but we'll touch on that in just a second. If we look at the map of the retreat from Dakar, we can see that it looks like the Raddus and the fleet would have departed along this hyperspace lane between Dakar and Crate and simply stopped about halfway to what would have otherwise been their destination. In the Last Jedi novelization, we get the following. "We're really nowhere. Deep space," he said. "How's Rey gonna find us now?" The fleet had emerged from hyperspace at an old Alliance rendezvous point that was nothing more than arbitrarily chosen coordinates, and Finn was staring at a holographic chart of their position, seemingly in dismay. So the Resistance stops at a random point along a vector, and the First Order is somehow able to discover them. Of course, that is assuming that just because the fleet traveled in real space to Crate, that it could have done so through a valid hyperspace route. Still, essentially this is saying that the computer on the Supremacy was able to analyze the ship's departure and predict that it would stop at what was admittedly random coordinates. Can this be explained? Maybe. For one, a ship's velocity entering hyperspace could indicate or at least suggest a destination. Such a thing wasn't true in Legends, but it could be now. I'm not sure whether it makes sense, as I've always assumed that the hyperspace engine sort of just facilitates the opening of the wormhole into hyperspace, but it's plausible. Another option is that we misunderstood hyperlanes. I've personally always assumed that although the lines may be somewhat curved on the map, that there were either dimensional distortions, such that straight line hyperspace travel was actually possible while still maintaining the curve, or that very slight adjustments were made mid-flight, but that could be wrong. Perhaps a ship needs to frequently stop and readjust. Or also, maybe the jumps are so specific that traveling to a single planet in space requires exact positioning. So, although Ramamul and Corellia are on the same lane, maybe a jump from Druckenwell will be different depending on the destination. Finally, we have the explanation that I think is best supported by the text, that the system relies largely on behavioral analysis. So, the First Order guessed that the Resistance would end at a specific location because it was a known rebel rendezvous point, and apparently it was the most likely exit point given the ship's trajectory. And this is actually the answer I think the novelization suggests. Still, I have to wonder, how could the First Order possibly determine that the fleet would stop at that specific random point when the planet Crate was also a rebellion base, and arguably just as likely as a stop point? We know it was a computer which made the decision, as the First Order fleet appeared almost immediately after the Raddus. It wasn't like they had time to send out probe droids. In other words, the computer looked at their departure point and determined that the fleet would not try to fully flee across the galaxy like Snoke feared, that they wouldn't simply run to Sullust, which most likely had at least a remnant of the New Republic home fleet, and rather that they would not only go to Crate, but that they would do so in real space, exiting hyperspace several hours away. Those are a lot of assumptions, but maybe they're obvious when the ship's vector coordinates are considered. I would assume that means hyperspace tracking would be ineffective from places where there are too many variables, like if the Raddus had left from Coruscant or a similar galactic hub. So, does it make sense? I guess so. I think there is a plausible explanation, at least for Star Wars standards, and hyperspace has never made a ton of sense, and has certainly been anything but consistent. Personally, I would have preferred if the explanation was simply that the Supremacy was able to identify some sort of wave or after effect of a ship traveling through hyperspace, and that's what I imagined until I read the novelization. But this has all just been my opinion. What do you think of hyperspace tracking and the First Order's use of advanced computers? Let me know all of that and more down in the comments. No question of the day today, but again, if you haven't seen Battle of the Dreadnoughts, please check it out. It was truly a labor of love between E.C. Henry and myself. Anyway, until next time guys, this has been EckhartsLadder. As always, may the Force be with you.